We'll see it.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, thanks. How are you doing? That's good. Thanks to everybody who obviously maybe saw my earlier talk and thought, hey, this guy's all right. Maybe I'll come see his next one. That's great. Thanks. I'm here all day, and there's a third one later on this afternoon. So I'm Jeff, for those of you who haven't met me yet, and I'm a security engineer at Security Innovation. I do ITSEC pen testing and advisory for pretty much all areas of software development. I am a hacker, I can admit it. I take that with pride, and I love solving complex problems. I used to be a high school teacher. I taught in prison as well, and in universities. I came all the way from Toronto to see you guys. I left my basement, left my cul-de-sac, and put on a suit for you and everything, which doesn't happen that often, so consider yourself fortunate. And I look forward to speaking with you today. And if you have questions, I am reasonably informal, so feel free to interrupt at any time. Why this talk? And it's really because I care. And it's because I care about you and your data. And I think I'm tired of hearing about breaches and it having the most impact on its users. And so companies not protecting data properly, breach occurs, and your information, you're the one who suffers. Or I hate getting a call from my mother or a friend and saying, I have this virus on my computer and I clicked on this email or something like that. And often people get caught up in the simplest of scams that are very unfortunate. I hate that, and I care. I want you to do better. And what you need to realize is often that even just small adjustments in your behavior can make a pretty significant impact in your security posture. So I'm really not going to tell you anything technical. I'm not going to go through any really complex hacks today. Save that for the one this afternoon. It's a little more interesting if you're into that thing. But I'm going to talk about some really steps you can make, some easy steps you can make to make yourself more secure. And hopefully you'll avoid having to make that phone call to your friend to say you've been hacked, especially if you're a security professional, because some of you should know better. So just in case, if you only read one slide today, it's this one. There's 5 simple steps you could take to improve your security posture. If anybody, I would bet that most of you probably aren't doing all 5. Kudos to you if you are, but use a password manager, keep your devices up to date, use two-factor authentication on all your accounts, and remember that free Wi-Fi comes at a cost. Don't connect to untrusted networks, and that can range as much as, I don't talk about this much in the slides, but that can range from hotels putting management system in to track your behaviors and to geofence their properties to see whatever tweets come out of their properties so that they can know how to respond to you better and obviously keep track of you better. Lock and encrypt your devices, phones and computers with strong passwords. And I did write a white paper. There's plenty of guides out there on this, but the guide's available for you if you want to check it out. It's got all the technical, this is how you set things up, these are the things you need to do. And in all areas, whether it's Mac, Windows, Android, whatever you're working in. So there's more detail on that. So the question you always have to ask yourself is really, how paranoid should I be? Like, should I live under a rock and not use any devices? Or is it safe to use my phone or laptop or whatever? And so you really need to ask yourself that. So protecting your data and privacy online can take a lot of effort. It's always going to be a trade-off between privacy and security and usability, right? You want the super secure, you can never get hacked system. You're going to be spending a lot of time and energy to achieve that, if it's even possible. So I'm going to introduce what I think is something you need to consider is when you try to answer the question, how paranoid should you be? It's going to depend on what I call your personal threat model. Now, Some people, if you work at IT security or in development and you hear threat model, you're like, oh God, more paperwork. Or you think it's a tedious task. It doesn't have to be. So when I say threat model, a simplified definition of what I call a threat model is just identify and quantify your weaknesses so you can come up with appropriate defenses. And you don't have to take into account everything I'm telling you today, but take into account what's important for you and where you think you're most at risk. So this is what I came up as my most simplified definition of a threat model. I asked Twitter a couple weeks ago if anybody could come up with a better definition, and the cynic on my Twitter followers said it's a plan for how to lose the company and you use it to try and keep it running. So that's another definition if you prefer. Like I said, they can be long and painful, but they don't have to be. Really, if you're going to do a threat model, you just have to ask yourself a couple questions. And for your personal threat model, you want to ask, what are the assets that you're trying to protect? What do you care most about? And what threats are the assets under? So based on a particular asset, how might it be attacked? And then what is my likelihood or probability of that threat being realized? And what can I do to protect myself? Right? So if you ask yourself those 4 questions personally, you can start to fill in the blanks around how you would defend or keep your personal data safe. So, I don't think this one got timing right, but first question, what are the assets we want to protect? So I've got a whole list. I've thought of some. I probably haven't thought of all of them. And if you think of more that aren't on here, by all means, speak up. So personal information, things like your name, age, date of birth. Maybe you want to keep the fact that you have children or protect your children online, or parents or spouse. You might have personal pictures, videos, documents, and not just intimate selfies, but other assets as well. You might be concerned about your financial information, your bank, loan, credit information, or anything need to process a banking transaction or things of that nature. Your location, this one's actually really hard if you really want to do it well, but your home address, places you frequent, or where you are right now. I'm here, please don't rob my house, right? So your social media accounts and their data, and that can be a different beast to tackle sometimes. Your physical devices, what have you lost or your device was stolen? And then if you are going to do sort of a BYOD, bring your own device sort of model, or you're going to operate your own business, well then you start blurring the lines between business and personal, and you have to start considering the business assets on your devices as well. Whether you want to care about your communications and your conversations, so email, text messages, chats, phone calls, everything like that. And then the metadata, or the data about data, when you called someone, who you text messaged, if this information is important to you, for you to keep private, then that might be an asset you consider. So when you're looking at this list right now, first of all, is there anything I've missed? Does anybody have an asset that they're really concerned about that isn't covered? Okay. I've thought of everything. Awesome. Great. If you think of something later, feel free to chime in. Now, what you would ask yourself is, which ones of these do I care about the most? Which do I care about least or less than the other? If there's some you really think are really crucial to you, well, then you would put a higher priority on that, and then you would focus more of your energy. I should mention that, so that's which of these assets is the most important for you. And then once you've defined that and you've said, I care about these assets, you got to ask yourself, how might somebody compromise these assets? How might they go after them or target me specifically if they wanted them? An important caveat to remember before I get too much further into this is you're never going to be perfect. There will always be some way you're vulnerable, and hopefully you can just mitigate that with other controls. And it takes a lot of effort. So I consider this keeping yourself safe online, consider it more like a journey You start with the basics, and then you eventually start caring more and more about different things, and you implement more and more controls that still fit within your manageability in terms of usability. So just keep that in mind as I'm telling you some of these tips throughout the lecture here, I guess. So I'm just going to go through each of the assets, and then I'll talk about some of the threats associated with them, as well as how you might choose to defend that. And then you can take from this what you like in terms of which actions you're going to take. So with your personal information, this one's actually hard because most of the information is probably already online. If I start Googling your name, I might be able to get your phone number, your address from a phone book directory, other blog posts you might have had. I might be able to find other lookups of information. So just using Google, I might get enough information about you. I might be able to read information leaked by your friends. So maybe people tagged you in a post on Facebook. I can't view your profile, but I can see their profile had information, and it said, had a great time at so-and-so's house, right? And then it's a picture of your house, or it's your address is posted or something. It just went to this party, and it says the location. So sometimes your friends can be places where your information gets leaked, and then other social media posts you leak might give you away as well. How do you defend against this? Because there's so much information probably about you out on the internet right now. Hack yourself. I'm a big proponent of it. You go on Google and you start looking and say, okay, I'm looking for my name and address and phone number. How might I find it? And then you know where those assets are stored online, so you know what information you're looking for, and then you can use that to better defend or change information. You can harden your social media settings, and I'll show you on the next slide how to do that. Where possible, if it's really important to you, use fake names. I totally recommend it. Develop, if you care about your personal privacy online, develop a complete alter ego and start building accounts in all of those areas. I keep a very clear definition for myself between personal and private, or public and private life. And I try to separate those as much as possible. I'm not perfect, but I would encourage you to do the same. So things like your Twitter account might be things that you're comfortable posting online, whereas Facebook or Instagram or other networking environments you might choose to keep private. That's your personal preference. I would encourage you to draw your own line in the sand so that you decide what is appropriate. And you can ask your friends not to tag you in pictures if you don't want to. It's perfectly reasonable. And if they say no, maybe they deserve an unfriend. I don't know. So here's just Facebook and Twitter. Look through all of these. You'll see there's general security, security and privacy, apps. The other thing to recognize is other apps will ask permission to access this data. So reviewing that, which apps have authorized access to your data is important. Review that from periodically and then remove them. And then go through these security settings to make sure that you understand what you're sharing with who through these social networks. And it's important to realize that these policies and settings change over time, regularly, actually. So it's important to check them on occasion, whether that's every 6 months or whenever you feel it necessary. So when we're talking about pictures, videos, and documents, we can talk about how an attacker might go after them. They might try to compromise, send you malware through phishing or attack your mobile device, rogue apps they try to get you to install, devices, or your desktop devices. We saw this with the iTunes hack where your cloud backup account might get compromised. Some apps or things auto-post features, auto-post images, you need to be aware of them. And then data that you share with friends eventually gets shared with everybody or posted on their account. So when you send a picture to somebody, it's gone beyond your control. You don't know what they're doing with it next, whether they're backing it up in the cloud or whether they're sending it on to more people or reposting it. So you need to just sort of have that in mind if this is an asset that that you're concerned with. So to protect against that, you're going to do things like keep your devices up to date, use strong passwords on all of your accounts, multi-factor authentication where possible. Some of these I'm going to mention multiple times. You're going to see a theme of important things that you should always already be doing. If you're not, I would encourage you to. And then, again, be aware of all the privacy settings for the applications you're using. And the average mobile device has dozens or more. I think some numbers I've heard as high as 50 apps on your mobile device. They're all asking for different permissions. They're all sharing your data in different ways. So it's important to consider those. When I talk about two-factor authentication, there's a site, TwoFactorAuth.org, and it lists all of the social media sites and how to support or how to enable two-factor on those particular sites. So it's worth checking out. And then they have a feature, I should warn you, they have a feature where it say like whatever bank doesn't support two-factor authentication. You can tweet them to ask them, here's their social media account. You can ask them to, or just apply pressure basically to encourage them to enable two-factor authentication. I probably wouldn't recommend doing that for your bank. I wouldn't recommend tweeting that this is the bank you use and you would like it for them to improve their security. That to me sets a pretty obvious target on your back. So I would encourage you to contact your bank directly to pressure them to implement two-factor authentication if they aren't already. Moves us to financial information. The threats you're going to consider is attacker compromises your online banking account, whether that be through guessing personal verification questions, PVQs, weak passwords, or if you can compromise their email account, it might allow me to reset my password on my banking account to get access and see the email and reset it that way. It's possible through other breaches or through other data leaks that an attacker is able to acquire enough information to perform a credit or loan application on your behalf. It's a tough one to defend once it's out there. There are websites you use. If you use a website that improperly stores your data. So think big retailer versus small retailer. If a small retailer doesn't have the same security controls in place or data protection strategies as a larger organization and they get breached, that could leave your credit card data or information vulnerable. You got to be careful. I mean, malicious point-of-sale devices exist. Anytime I see a point-of-sale, anytime I'm putting my credit card into like a gas station or anything like that, I usually try to like break the device to see if it'll just peel off or not, because the skimmers usually go on top of it. So I'll usually try to bend it back and see if I can remove it easily. And if I remove it easily, it's probably not a real device, so just have an eye. It's one of those things I do every time, and one time I'm going to find it, and I'm going to be really excited. But not excited because, obviously, I found a skimming device. PayPal or other accounts are compromised that have your financial information as well. My defenses that I would recommend would be to lie on all of your PVQ questions. If you're using a password manager, you can store all your strong passwords and the answers to your password manager answers to your PVQ questions in the password manager so that if you need them, you can look them up. But I wouldn't recommend like mother's maiden name, and some of the questions they ask are easily found through the reconnaissance area of just Googling for a lot of the information. Use multi-factor authentication. I've said this a couple times already. You're starting to see a theme come through. And never give out your SIN, Social Security. I guess in Latvia it's called a personal code. Am I correct? I Googled. Am I correct? Good. Okay. Anybody? What's the format? Anybody want to tell me theirs just to check?
All right. So 6 digits dash and 5 digits.
It consists of the birth date and some
Okay.
another part.
So like yours would be. So it's a trade-off, but I mean, everybody gets hacked when it comes to retailers and stuff like that. So it's just a matter of how they respond and what they're doing with your data. But I think a big retailer is probably a safer bet than a smaller one because they invest more in security, hopefully, or they've been breached before and they've then adjusted and put more security controls in place. Just a brief slide on password managers. There's a few popular ones. There's dozens of them. It's important to consider the features of them and which ones, how they play into your threat model. So some of them will allow you to encrypt the database and store it locally, whereas others use remote cloud features and magical encryption, however they end up doing it. Some are good, some are not, less good, I guess, if you will. Some use in-browser extensions, which make it really convenient because they auto-type in all your passwords. Some are built into browsers. Some allow you to pass and share passwords with other users. This is handy in corporations where the IT will set up the password and then deploy it to the users, and then the users will be encouraged to change the password. So consider the implications of those features when choosing one, and look what they're capable of. So I argue that probably the location's the hardest one to really be private about. It maybe, depending on your threat model, like maybe it's easy to keep it private from your friends, but to keep it private from governments or your internet service provider or other apps is a challenge. And so all of those organizations would easily be able to tell your location at any given time with their access to cell towers or with their access to your geolocation in the app features. The general public might be able to just pull that information from social media posts that leaks your location. It's tagged into it automatically sometimes if you don't disable it. A lot of those features are on by default. Image data leaks the location. Sometimes that's tagged as part of the data about the image, so that can be leaked on occasion. And a motivated attacker might be able to launch attacks to try and get that information from you. So if you're really concerned about this, full burner phone and laptop with Tor or VPN usage is going to be your threat model. This occurs to me on some occasions, but usually for different reasons than the location. Just on time, I want to speed up a bit. Image content. So this is an interesting story. Someone posted this picture and said they were in Miami, loving the view. Well, people were able to extract based from hotel websites and go in and say, based on the hotel TripAdvisor or whatever, Expedia pictures of the hotels in that area, we're able to sift through to find out what hotel they were at. And then using Google Street View, they were able to exactly find what that view would look like what those buildings were in the background. So you could narrow it down to the exact floor and side of the building that they were on based on just that image alone. It's an interesting story. That was from 2014 post there. This is one when Tinder in 2014, colleague I know disclosed that the Tinder API, by default, by just using it and spoofing your GPS location, you could trilaterate the exact user's position. So think of the implications of a dating app, and then think of the implications of the location features. If that's been since fixed, but at the time it was a vulnerability that could have been exploited. Social media accounts gets compromised. So the social media, same as any other account, similarly, you just want to make sure that you're doing all the right things. You're using strong passwords, two-factor authentication, restricting third-party app access, and reviewing the security settings, doing this on a regular basis, avoiding phishing emails. You really should think about what emails you would get from a social media or banking site. You're probably going to get your things like updates or alerts, but they're probably not going to tell you to click on a link to change your password. It happens on occasion. There was a LinkedIn issue, but they did that when you next logged in, not by sending an email. And they actually wouldn't put a link to their site. They would direct you to go to the web page. So if you're ever suspect of an email like that, go directly to the web page, log in, and then change your password. But don't click on the link to go and change your password. Physical devices, if they're lost or stolen. How am I on time? Because I started later, right?
It's good time for questions, but
I'm going to need a few more minutes. Lost or stolen devices. Simple things you can do is strong passwords and full disk encryption. This is often enabled on your phone. When you put on a password, it enables the full disk encryption feature. That way it's going to be a lot harder. We saw with the FBI versus Apple in the Bernardino case where it was very difficult for the FBI to gain access. So it's going to make your data reasonably safe if it's lost. Test the features for the Lost My Device app. It's important to do that before you lose it, right? So just make sure it works. And usually enable that remote wipe capability in case you do lose your device and you can't find it. It's not a guarantee, but if it's something you might need, enable it anyways, and hopefully it'll work. That way your data won't be leaked. Your threat model will drastically change if you have business assets. For me personally, I'm a penetration tester. On my laptop, not the one I brought to here, is vulnerability data about companies, right? So there is data on how to exploit my clients. That data is of critical value to me, and I don't easily take it across borders, and I don't travel with it. If my laptop was lost or stolen, that would be a big, serious thing for a security company to get hacked and lose client data, right? So the impact of that scenario is so high for me that I take drastic considerations to ensure that the data isn't leaked. So if you're carrying business assets, you need to keep that in mind and then consider the implications of your personal assets of BYOD. So if you have a BYOD device and your company has a policy on it that allows remote wipe, you could be losing your data when they when you end with them. If they let you go abruptly, they could be wiping your data as well as their data. If you're going to use personal communications and you're concerned about that, we can talk, I'll skip the threats, but the messenger apps I would recommend would be Signal, made by OpenWhisper, which is a cryptographic protocol that does end-to-end communication between the two users. It's the best one out there, and they were sued recently by the US government for information, and it's like, sorry, we got nothing to give. So they have your back. Recently, Facebook and WhatsApp have said that they have your back as well, and you've seen that Apple is coming along. So who do you trust as a provider? There's companies that aren't on this list. I'm not in the business of naming and shaming, but these are people who've proven that they do have your back. And the last one is data about data in terms of, this one's really challenging to defend, but if you really want to be anonymous online, it is really hard. Even the best hackers who are out causing havoc in the world, they get caught through simple slip-ups in these things here. So it's really challenging. You're going to have to go to a burner phone, accounts, full proxies and VPNs, and I would encourage you different things like strategies like time delays to affect when your data was being sent, and creating additional noise. So I'm not going to tell you how to be totally anonymous as a hacker to do evil, but if you're concerned, if you're a journalist or a lawyer and privacy and security are of high concern to you, those are things you should look into a little further. And I have a paper on the subject. You can check it out. I have another talk today on catching IMSI catchers, and it's on the 11th floor. If you haven't seen it, been up there yet, it's a beautiful view. So I would certainly encourage you to come.